You can see him right now on the road going from training camp destination to training camp destination because NFL training camps are open and there are a lot of storylines to break down. Today, we're going to do it with ESPN senior NFL reporter Jeremy Fowler. Jeremy, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you, Chase. Appreciate you having me, man. I'm headed to the Chicago Bears camp right now. I'm in the middle of the country.
Well, I'm sure it's obviously a very fun grind being the senior reporter at ESPN for the National Football League. And obviously, I just mentioned it, NFL training camps have begun. I know you've been going from training camp location to training camp location. Overall, has there been anything in particular that has stood out to you from one particular team or one particular situation?
Ooh, that's a good question. So, the Lions are going to be pretty good again. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I know they're switching coordinators with Ben Johnson going to Chicago, but they are probably even more talented than they've ever been. So there's no reason why they can't compete and contend even more so than they already have. So that certainly comes to mind. The Bengals, I was there yesterday, and it's a weird dynamic there because the offense is just so good, and they really just need the defense to be average, which Cincinnati does expect it to be better. But the absence of Trey Hendrickson looms large. They can't find middle ground there, and so they're stuck. And they have to try to make it work with a defense that's sort of void of talent in spots. But Shamar Stewart, the rookie first-round pick that signed recently, he made a couple plays while I was there. So that was noteworthy to see. And then, the Colts, I was there today with the quarterback battle. Both Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, I thought, looked good. Their decision-making was good. They were throwing the ball well. They looked calm in the pocket. So that's good signs for Colts fans.
I mean, this is definitely a make it or break it type year for Anthony Richardson because you need to see some level of production from him. If not, Indianapolis will want to move on long term with the direction of their franchise. I want to go back to what you just mentioned about Cincinnati. Obviously, they've kind of been the center of attention this offseason, the Shamar Stewart saga, and then now, obviously, with Trey Hendrickson, he's not at training camp. You were on Get Up this morning, breaking it down. It doesn't seem like both sides can agree. Just reiterate to the audience how those talks are going and how close the two sides are to reaching an agreement.
Yeah, they've actually had some progress in some areas and got somewhat close to a deal around the reporting date of training camp. So last week sometime. And when they went back and forth, there was just a disagreement over the guaranteed money. That is the issue. That's the sticky point here. He wants guaranteed money longer in the deal, so not just in the first year, but multiple years. And so they have to find a sweet spot on that. Cincinnati is a team that doesn't cave very often and change their demands. So it really is a true standoff right now. The player believes that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, they got concessions in their contracts with guaranteed money, so why can't I? Is sort of the feeling, even though those players are younger. So I think the Bengals are arguing, hey, it's Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. They're in a little bit of a different category than everybody else. So it's a difference of opinion, and somebody's going to have to either relent or try to compromise somehow.
Well, which side do you think will do that first? Because, Trey Hendrickson, he's just taking these $50,000 fines by the day. But on the other side, he's probably like, look, Cincinnati, I know your defense is not going to do anything without me as the anchor. They were still one of the worst in the NFL, even with him leading the league in sacks last year. So they need him in there. Which side do you believe has more leverage? Which will budge first?
Well, I certainly think that Hendrickson intends to stay away and be dug in here. It's just typically it's hard to, even though I certainly favor the players in getting every dollar they can, these situations are hard for them to win in if you have a team that's dug in. And Cincinnati is just one of those teams that's comfortable being uncomfortable, I would call it. They're okay just hanging on their precedent for contracts and just making you squirm a little bit. So eventually that money's going to get crazy with those fines. And, you've seen it with other players that they hold out well into the season. They do end up losing money. Hassan Reddick last year, Melvin Gordon, a running back once upon a time at the Chargers. So
sure,
maybe Hendrickson's different because of the caliber of player that he is and the leverage he does have. But I tend to think that the player would go first in this case.
We obviously will have to see what happens. Speaking of Cincinnati, they finally did reach that agreement with Shamar Stewart. You mentioned it earlier, though it did take a long time. There have been others, though, from this draft class who have taken a pretty substantial amount of time to sign their rookie deals, particularly many second-round picks. How come signing rookie contracts has become so difficult in the National Football League?
So it's interesting because the agents in the second round realized, and to a extent, the NFL Players Union realized that they were getting really close to getting fully guaranteed 100% contracts in the second round last year in a few spots. So they figured this was the year to get some of those on the books. They projected they could get 8 of them, and right now they have 7 with Quinshon Judkins unsigned. So part of the reason why it was 8 contracts is because Tyler Shuck, the quarterback, was sitting at 40, so there was some leverage because of the position he played, and the Saints need to get him in there in the quarterback battle. So because of that, they went back and forth, these teams who wanted to stick to their own precedent, but it got close to reporting date, and there were only 2 of the second rounders signed. So it really was a case of the players and the agents sort of communicating and sticking together here to try to make sure that they could get the best leverage they could. And then once Alfred Collins, who was in the middle of the second round, I believe, signed with the 49ers, felt like he had a good enough deal to do so, that opened the waterfall and the floodgates for others to sign. But it really is kind of interesting because, there were sort of pennies in the couch cushions of NFL owners that the players were able to find and turn into millions of dollars of guaranteed money.
Truly is fascinating, and I wonder how it will change kind of this whole rookie contract signing long term for future drafts. Let's go to Washington here real quick. Let's talk about Terry McLaurin. Obviously, he's been the biggest storyline, it feels like, of the past few weeks. He wants more than DK Metcalf, who just signed for $33 million annually, but now he's at training camp and he's on the physically unable to perform list with the lingering ankle injury. How are those talks going? When do you feel this conflict will get resolved?
Well, I don't sense a lot of momentum, that's for sure. There hasn't been, it's been uncomfortable, and Terry's been frustrated for a long time. And the thing about the DK Metcalf number, I think Terry McLaurin looks at himself as a better player than DK Metcalf. Most around the league do too. So if you're Terry, or if you're representing Terry, or you're looking at that situation, you're saying, well, DK Metcalf got that, why can't McLaurin, who's a better player, more accomplished, probably more important to his team? The problem is when DK Metcalf got traded to Pittsburgh was desperate for that kind of player, and they were willing to pay the price for it, where Seattle was not. So in this case, my understanding of the situation is Washington was only really comfortable doing like a slight increase from where he already was, which was $23 million a year. Well, if you're McLaurin, you're saying that's not even close. So that's where the frustration lies. And I'm sure Washington now would be willing to do more than that, I would think. It's just my guess, but they've been pretty far apart. So there's going to have to be some major progress here soon. And they have a lot of time. There's really no reason to panic. We're still in July. But, eventually he's going to want to get on the practice field. And I don't see him doing so without a new deal.
Right, and I mean, you talk about how important he is. I mean, he's had 1,000 yards, and pretty much he's had 1,000 yards every year but one in his entire career. He stayed loyal to Washington, and he was so important to why Jaden Daniels had such a great rookie year last year. So it is very important. Yeah. You mentioned it's just July, but it is going to get late early eventually. How likely is it that this lingers into August? Is there any possibility that it's week 1 and Terry McLaurin isn't suiting up for Washington?
Well, I go back to the Trey Hendrickson situation. Both players, from what I've gathered, are very dug in and convicted on what they want. So that can go one of two ways. You can either believe that to be true, or figure, hey, once the season gets going and you're forfeiting millions of dollars, that's just too tough to overcome for any player. So you kind of just almost have to project whether they're bluffing or not. I don't necessarily think Terry McLaurin's bluffing, but every player has a price and a breaking point. So it's just going to be interesting to see how far he's willing to take this. I don't know the exact date that is a cutoff for him where he says, okay, I'm just going to start to play now, and I don't want to sit out games. I mean, he's there, I guess, so there's no forfeiting of money. That's the good thing. But, I do think it's realistic that he could miss games, but I just think cooler heads will prevail here. Washington needs him. I mean, they just do. They have a window here. They have a young quarterback who's got great chemistry with McLaurin. So I think that's his leverage here. I think they can find a sweet spot. McLaurin, for as good as he is, he doesn't belong in that, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson tier. So he's got to find some sort of sweet spot. I think if McLaurin can get Washington to at least just acknowledge the receiver market a little bit, Denver just paid Cortland Sutton a new deal of, $92 million over 4 years. So that math is, $23 million a year, I think. So McLaurin's a better player than Cortland Sutton. So maybe they can meet in the middle somewhere between DK Metcalf and Cortland Sutton. That's probably not good enough for Terry. He's going to want to be in that $30 million range, but Washington's going to want a discount because he's on his third contract. So I still think they can come to a compromise here in the next few weeks, and that would be my guess. But right now, that just doesn't feel like something that is building momentum toward.
It will be something we'll have to monitor. Kind of one last, actually not a holdout, but more just a contract situation I want to break down. It is Micah Parsons. He's been there, but it seems frustrated, as is the fan base, that a deal hasn't gotten done. I had the Athletics' John Machota, who covers the Cowboys, recently on my podcast, and he said that he thinks that this deal will get done kind of right towards the end of the preseason, right before the season, like we saw from CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott a season ago. How likely do you believe that possibility is?
Yeah. Well, certainly the timeline makes sense. You look at CeeDee Lamb, he got his deal done in late August. That was really my expectation all along. That's just the way Dallas has chose to do business in recent years, and seemed to be costing them some money. But I think the old way of doing things with teams is they would wait it out and try to wait the player out until that player gets impatient, and maybe they find themselves a discount even. And that seemed to be the case 5 to 10 years ago. It's not as much the case now, especially with a player of this caliber. I think what Dallas has run into is you have 3 players, one of which is a quarterback with tremendous leverage in Dak Prescott. And, there are only so many players on earth at the most important position that can do what he does. So he got the deals he wanted. It took a lot of time. CeeDee Lamb, top 5 receiver in a market that pays a lot. And now Micah Parsons, a top player in the pass rush. So you're looking at premium positions, premium players. In this era is just going to cost, and it's almost slotted. Those guys have to sort of be the highest paid or close to it. Know, so Dallas has chose to kind of roll with the old way of thinking, which is wait the player out. Maybe they'll make a mistake or get impatient, but I just don't see that with Micah Parsons' agent is David Mulugeta, who's one of the most powerful agents. He gets among the best contracts, so I just don't see a win here for Dallas other than just trying to do the deal now. I think Micah would be willing to hold out. He's holding in, but willing to withhold his services for a while. Honestly, I think this is different than Terry McLaurin and some of these others, because he's in his prime, going on a second contract, arguably the best pass rusher in the NFL outside of maybe Myles Garrett, TJ Watt. So tremendous leverage. He'll probably be the highest paid non-quarterback in the league when this is all said and done.
We'll also have to monitor that as well. Very interesting situation. Dallas, is obviously always a center of attention, particularly when you have a hold-in like this. We'll have to keep an eye on that. I want to talk about you just concluded your anonymous coaches, scouts, and executives top 10 rankings at every position. I want to focus specifically at the quarterback position. When you're talking to these scouts, these coaches, these executives, what do they appear to be looking for in a quarterback when they're crafting their top 10 list?
Ooh, that's a good question. So they look for, really one thing they look for at any position, including quarterback, is who is what you would call scheme transcendent, right? Who has the type of athletic traits and makeup where you can put them in any scheme, any situation. You can put them against adversity. So you can put them in an offense that maybe doesn't have great talent around it. All things, and you can put the team on their back and they can carry it. So that's why Josh Allen moved up to number 2 this year. He showed that in a big way. The top 4 is pretty well set with Mahomes, Allen, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson. That is a golden era quartet of quarterbacks.
Right.
The next 10 years, the NFL is in great hands with those players. Outside of that, you're looking for quarterbacks that can throw to all 3 levels of the field. You're looking for mobility, dual threat ability. You're looking for toughness. You're looking for guys that are going to hang in the pocket and wait for the big play to develop and take a hit when you need to. All those things, and you look for you look for a quarterback that you have to game plan against, not game plan as part of an offense. Or like, for instance, some people might get knocked, and I know Jalen Hurts has been a big topic of conversation. Like when you play the Eagles, are you scheming against Jalen Hurts or are you scheming against A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, Devontae Smith, Lane Johnson, all
Right.
those guys. Maybe
Sure.
that's not a fair question, but I do think when I talk to some of these people, they look at it that way. For all of Justin Herbert's flaws, when you play the Chargers, you're scheming against Justin Herbert.
Sure. And obviously, that is something you have to keep an eye out for. And obviously, you have to incorporate postseason play. And that's why it's so difficult. I mean, there is no perfect, top 10 quarterback ranking. I want to touch on one quick thing, and that's Lamar Jackson. And I feel like in these anonymous polls that have been going on the past few years, it's felt like maybe he's been underrated in the sense. He was unranked entering 2022, just seventh entering
Yeah.
2023. And he's been the first T-ball pro the past 2 years and hasn't cracked the top 3 slots. Why do you believe the anonymous coaches, scouts, and executives you're talking with, why are they lower on Jackson than most fans and analysts?
That's a good question. They definitely have given him the respect he deserves in putting him in that top 4, but not having him limp into that group, but he's firmly in it. He got some first place votes. I think the season Joe Burrow had hurt Lamar's case a little bit, with Joe having no defense. And I know he has Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, which helps, but he played the quarterback position better than anybody last year. So that kind of affected Lamar's standing a little bit. Lamar probably should have been 3, but Burrow sneaking in there affected things. So he's been for sure. And, it was shocking when he was 11th one year, and it wasn't that long ago. I think it was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
But at that time, a lot of people around the league just argued he wasn't a polished passer, hadn't really made the strides he needed to, and he had been injured. So now he's been in Todd Monken's offense for 2 years, and he's shown what happens when you dedicate a passing offense around him. So that's been the cool thing to see. So he's in his rightful place. Some of it's probably the playoff woes, He had that bad game in Buffalo, which wasn't all his fault, and he made a good drive at the end of the game, but, a couple of the turnovers hurt him. If he doesn't do that, I think it's probably a different list.
Very interesting, and I think that the postseason play is always definitely a factor. Jeremy Fowler, there's so much to talk about currently with this NFL season. Real quick, just kind of rapid fire. ESPN Bet just put out a stat. Over 40% of playoff teams over the past 5 to 10 years are different from the ones who made it the previous seasons. There's a lot of turnover when it comes to postseason teams. Which teams do you expect to take an unexpected leap, and which teams with high expectations do you expect to disappoint?
Ooh, so let me think around the league here. I have New England on the upswing. In the same division, I have Miami on the downswing a little bit. I just think they've had so much turnover and kind of replaced starters with cheaper options. Maybe that will prove fruitful for them, but I just don't know if they have enough certain spots on the field. New England, I do think is trending upward. And I got Tennessee. I was kind of high on Tennessee last year, and they disappointed me, so I'm going to stick with them. I just think their roster is intriguing, and the signs of Cam Ward are pretty real. I do think he's going to be a guy.
When it comes to the Washington Commanders, we talked about them earlier. There's always the conversation sophomore slump for Jaden Daniels. Yeah. Do you believe, Washington overachieved last year NFC Championship game? Do you expect them to replicate at least some type of that performance? Do you think they will kind of disappoint expectations?
Well, that is actually a complicated picture in my mind, because on paper, you think they would build on what they did, and they got Laramie Tunsil and Deebo Samuel, 2 prime positions, high caliber players. They should help Jaden Daniels in year 2. At the same time, you do wonder if, can Cliff Kingsbury's offense sustain the momentum? I think it can. He was a brilliant play caller last year, but he does have a system that sort of got figured out in Arizona a little bit. And I think he can make tweaks to that and learn from that. And part of that was, he and Kyler Murray weren't hitting it off too. They had their issues, and it kind of fizzled out, that pairing at the end, where Jaden Daniels, I do think, is a different player. But you do wonder, with a year for defenses to learn from Jaden Daniels and learn from Kingsbury's offense, and can they maybe make adjustments that fluster them? I don't know. I think it's possible. So it's at the very least something to watch out for. And I still think they'll be okay. They made it to the NFC Championship game with essentially one accomplished receiver and a 34-year-old tight end, and an average offensive line. And that was largely because of Jaden Daniels. And I know they had a lot of come-from-behind wins, so that's hard to replicate, but I still think they'll be in the mix. I know people in the NFC East are sort of scared to death of what Washington can be because of Jaden.
Jaden Daniels does seem like that future, generational franchise quarterback. Jeremy Fowler, this has been great. Real quick, Tuesday, July 29th, as of the date we're recording this, what is your early Super Bowl prediction?
We talked about Lamar Jackson earlier. I do have Baltimore. I just think with what they have offensively, it's the best skill position group that Lamar's had there. And the defense is stout. I mean, they really have everything they need. It just feels like they're due. So I'll go Detroit and Baltimore. That's my pick.
And the Ravens winning it all?
Yeah, I got the Ravens winning it all. Yeah, I just think they felt like if they could have gotten through if they could have gotten through that Buffalo game, they would have run through the rest of the playoffs. I do believe they thought that.
Jeremy Fowler, this has been awesome. It's been a pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast to talk some football. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Anytime, Chase. Appreciate your hustle, man.
Thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up here alongside ESPN senior NFL reporter Jeremy Fowler. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long from Chase's Sports News.